Welcome to the Aboriginal channel. This episode will be part 4 to the Bible Weaponized. Here I will read a short story that will have direct correlations from Indian culture to the Holy Scriptures. So it says Yamakuta, a sacred sky observatory in southeastern North America. This observation, taken from the writings of G.J.N. Wilson, The Early History of Jackson County, Georgia, gives a remarkable account of a Native American Stonehenge-like construction, as well as description of the type conditions which prompted a gathering. Perhaps there are comparatively few people now living in the county who know that there is such a place in it as the Tumbling Shoals. For more than a generation, no road, public or private, has led within sight of them. And like most others, things pertaining to the early settlement of this country by the Anglo-Saxon race, their history has never been written. They are about 1 mile below the well-known Hurricane Shoals on North Oconee River, where the water goes whirling around one end of a solid rock dam built by the hand of nature and then ripples over a series of miniature falls in such a way as to seem that one wave rolls or tumbles over another, hence the name, which comes from the Cherokee word Yamakuta, signifying to tumble. In 1784, Jordan Clark and Jacob Bankston, two enterprising and adventurous young men, came from Virginia to Wilkes County, Georgia. There they met with a roving band of Choctaw Indians who told them of a strange old campground which they called Yamakuta. They said it was located on the banks of Oconee River, some 2 days' journey towards the setting sun, that the Great Spirit once lived there, and that once his disappearance, Indians sometimes went to the place to walk the paths which God once trod, and then hastened away, as he had done, without leaving a trail to show which way they went. Having their curiosity aroused, Clark and Bankston at once resolved to go and see if the Choctaws had told them the truth. Late on the afternoon of April 22nd, 1784, they reached a series of small shoals, which they immediately recognized as Yamakuta. While the stream was small and the shoals modest, they were curious, and their surroundings were sublime and awe-inspiring, far beyond anything known to the present inhabitants. Trees of fabulous dimensions interlocked their ponderous branches, and acorns and chestnuts of the previous year literally covered the ground. The glaring eyes and startling bound of the red deer, the wild chattering of a multitude of birds, and the warning signal of the rattlesnake told the newcomers that such beings had seldom, if ever, been there before. Distant some 20 yards, a great black bear was perched in the fork of a tree. As he moved his forepaws with the evident intention of descending, a ball from Clark's deadly rifle crashed through his head. Curious to say, as was afterwards learned, that bear's life was the first ever known to be taken at or near Yamakuta. After a delightful supper of broiled bear ham, as the adventurers described it, they slept by turns through most of the night, and with the rising sun began a careful examination of their surroundings. About 75 yards from the west end of the natural rock dam, they discovered a curious upright statue, a little over 4 feet high. It was made of a soft Tecluse rock, 13 inches square at the bottom, but the top, from the shoulders up, was a fair representation of the human figure. The shoulders were rudimentary, but the head was well formed. The neck was unduly long and slender. The chin, forehead were retreating. The eyes were finely executed and looked anxiously at the east. It stood at the center of an earth mound, 17 feet in circumference and 6 feet high. So it was 6 feet high mound, and then the statue was 4 feet. Around it were many other mysteries which will never be fully explained. Only a few of them may be mentioned now. 4 paths, doubtless the ones the Choctaws mentioned, led with mathematical precision from the base of the mound to the cardinal points of the compass, the 4 corners. Though it seemed that no other part of the forest had been trodden by human feet, these paths were as smooth and clean as a parlor floor. The scrubby cane, which seemed to have been planted by design along their margins was as neatly trimmed as if the work had been done by a professional gardener. And here, amid those gloomy solitudes, the natives believed that our God, their great spirit, had walked as a man walks along his homeward pathway. Pause. So this place right here in Jackson County, Georgia, is a place that the Indians believed God walked as a man walks along his homeward pathway. It says the statue was found to be the center of an exact circle about 150 yards in diameter. There's that circle again. Its boundary was plainly marked by holes in the ground 3 feet apart. The holes to which the paths ran in a straight line from the center were much larger than the intervening ones. And before them, inside the circle, were what seemed to be stone altars of varying dimensions. At the end of the path running to the north was a single triangular stone. At the east were 5 square stones and 4 steps. At the west, 4 stones and 3 steps. At the south, 3 stones and 2 steps. Upon the upper surface of all the stones, except at the north, the effect of fire was plainly visible and doubtless had been used for sacrificial purposes. All the paths terminated at the altars except the one running to the east. At this, the trail parted, and uniting beyond it, continued a short distance, and then, much like an ascending column of smoke, disappeared gradually. The account given by the Choctaws was verified. On the smooth surfaces of the stones were deeply cut both 3 and 5 pointed half moons, whose horns turned in different ways. A good representation of the rising sun and other curious characters were deeply cut on the eastern altar. Outside of the circle were many ash heaps, beaten hard by the heavy hand of time, and over some of them were growing gigantic oaks and towering pines, as if to mark the grave of the dead past. Having studied these and other features of the vicinity, the adventurers were back to their starting point with a determination to return and make a permanent settlement at Yamakuta. For an unknown period of time, the immediate territory on both sides of the river and for about 1 mile below and to the hurricane shoals above was neutral ground claimed by neither Creek nor Cherokee, the lords of the adjoining territory. For reasons already given, it was considered holy ground. The Indians, Palestine. If on the warpath, they went around it. If enemies met there, they became friends as long as they remained there. By mutual consent of all the tribes, the life of neither beast nor bird nor any living thing should ever perish there. It was ever to be a place of refuge and ever to have upon it the stain of blood. The killing of the bear by Clark was the first breach of law in the holy ground and led, a few years later, to open hostilities between the red and white men who lived in this part of the country. It goes on to say that on the 20th day of the following June, Clark and Bankston returned to Yamakuta and began the first permanent settlement of white people in the present limits of Jackson County. That was in the late 1700s in Jackson County. And then in present time, in North Houston, which is in Jackson County in North Georgia, we have where the mayor this past December resigned after the battle over reported racist remarks. And I wouldn't be putting emphasis on somebody having racist remarks because that don't mean nothing to me. However, it's what she said and where she said it at that is very, very offensive based upon what we know now. It says this woman right here, you see, Mayor Teresa Kennerly came under fire when she reportedly said the city was not ready for a black administrator back in May of 2019. So they didn't want to hire nobody black at the city council right there in Jackson County, where during the day many Indians came and seating themselves around the mystic circle, gazed steadfastly towards the central figure. This they continued all day and perhaps all night. For when next morning they saw the sun rise bright and golden as ever, they arose as one man, went inside the circle, and solemnly walking along the path to a step as regular as the beating of a healthy heart, they disappeared beyond the eastern altar, as already indicated. So right there in Jackson County, Georgia, there was a very, very sacred altar on holy ground that somehow the lady got it in her mind that the city wasn't ready for a black administrator. Creator. Now, in the Bible, in Genesis 3, chapter 8, it says, they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. So basically, right there in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis in the Bible, you have God walking. But I want to go back here so we can learn a little bit about the culture of separating the light from darkness. So here it says that God, in the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter of Genesis, it says, let there be light, and there was light. And then after that, God saw the light and that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. So before I explain that, I want to go back and look at the book America from 1671 and how it explains the foundation of the spirituality of the American Indian. So it says that they worship the sun, attributing only to it the increase of the plants, helpful season, and most other good things they enjoy are sensible of. So one of the things that they're sensible of outside of the sun, the plants, the seasons is upon an individual's death, the spirit transferring to the spiritual world. And they do that by dividing light from the darkness. Here in the article of Yamakuta, it says that there was an upright statue a little over 4 feet high, and that the eyes were finely executed and looked anxiously to the east. Now, I was looking to the east because the sun comes up from the east, and that's because the person that on the statue was the spiritual guide. So they're looking for the sun to come up so that themselves, along with the spirits that they're guiding, can go with the sun as it sets. It says down here that all paths terminated at the altars except the one running to the east. So that allowed the sun to come through to the altar, and then on the other side of the altar would usually be, and the mound would usually be where the dead would be buried at, so that the sun, when it came over the mound, there was darkness behind the mound, and then when the sun went down all the way, at that point it would carry the spirit with it. So in a way, the sun was divided by way of the mound or the structure. Sometimes it would even be a natural mountain that they would bury their dead on the west side of, so that during some time in the day the sun would be going down, and on so it would be lit up on this side of the mountain where the dead would be buried at, and then on the other side it would be dark because the mountain closed off the sunlight. A good example of what I'm trying to explain here can be seen on the movie The Black Panther, when Killmonger dies and they bring him up out of the mountain and on the cliff, and as the sun sets or goes down, they have him sitting there Indian style, and that's a allegory of American Indian culture. It goes on further to say, good representation of the rising sun and other curious characters were deeply cut on the eastern altar. So that gives you a little more of an understanding of what I'm trying to explain, is that character of the rising sun was cut deeply into the eastern altar. This is a common practice among those of sun worship, as you can look in Giza at the Great Pyramids in Africa, and you see there's a dog or a lion or some kind of animal there facing east, waiting on the sun to arrive, because that dog or that lion or that animal is the spirit guide. Now here I looked up on legendsofamerica.com Native American rituals, where it says the death ceremonies. Native Americans celebrated death knowing that it was the end of life on earth, but believing it to be the start of life in the spiritual world. And that's exactly what Christianity believes. The Hoppe Indians believe that the soul moves along a sky path westwards, and that those who have lived a righteous life will travel with ease. However, those who haven't will encounter suffering on their journey. That's the same thing as Christians say, that if you live righteous, you'll go to heaven. If you don't, you'll go to hell. Same exact doctrine. But we must specifically look at how it says they believe the soul moves along a sky path westward, because the sun is what ultimately carries your soul into the afterlife. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then what's the